So I'm going to give us a little bit of time. I was trying really hard to keep my sermon shorter this summer. I don't know if it's worked. But so which of Jesus' miracles do you find most interesting and why? Anybody want to share? Go ahead, Samuel. The little Samuel, not my son Samuel, sorry. Yes, the feeding of the 5,000 with just a few loaves of bread and some fishes. Yeah, that's a really cool one. And did you know it's actually more than 5,000 people? It just said 5,000 men. So if you add in the ladies and the kids, there might have been 10, 12,000 people there. All right. Anybody else? Favorite miracle? And why? Where am I at? Go ahead, Dorothy. Oh, okay. So raising of the dead. Yep. There's several, right? Jairus' daughter. Okay. Yeah, to come out. Yep. So good. That is amazing. Anybody else? Go ahead. Favorite? Now, is that the one where they cut the hole in the roof or the one where they're at the pool of Bethesda? Okay, yeah, the hole in the roof is really cool because what I love what Jesus says is your faith has made you well, right? Stand up and walk. So cool. Go ahead, Miss Calliope. Water into wine. Come on, girl. We're doing that one today. Yeah. Thank you. That was a good transitional moment. Yes, go ahead, Mia. Oh, yeah, the Gadarene demoniac. Isn't that a cool name? Where he's up in this area of the Gadarenes where a man is being inhabited by demons. And then Jesus casts them out and puts them in a whole bunch of pigs, and pigs run off the other side, and everybody in town's like, "Go away, Jesus, you scare us." That one. Yeah. All right, anybody else? Favorite miracle of Jesus? Go ahead.
When Jesus takes his water spit, and it's really interesting because it doesn't spit on everyone else.
Yeah. Let's get coffee and we'll try to explain that one. Jimmy said the one where Jesus takes spit and then rubs it in a blind man's eyes. I want to get healed, but that's an interesting way of doing it. Yeah. Right. That's true. Yeah, the blind guy did not know it was coming. Good point. Yeah. There's your answer, Jimmy. That's why that happened. Blind guy didn't know it was coming. Okay. Any young people in the room that did not get one of these before we jump in? I want to make sure. We've been handing out sermon workbooks all summer long. And I've gotten to see a couple of them and get some feedback. It's been so cool. We got a couple weeks left of doing it this way. And at the last week, what I'm going to invite you to do is both grown-ups and students. As we get to the end of the series, I'm going to ask everybody that actually took notes throughout the series to kind of raise hands, and then we're going to partner you up together. So that's in a couple weeks. So anybody need one? We're good. Okay. So which of Jesus' miracles do you find most interesting and why? Here's my answer, and it's been this way for quite some time. I'm so grateful I got to preach on this today because I learned a lot in these last couple of weeks, but specifically the one about water into wine. The water into wine one has fascinated me for the last 25 years of doing ministry. I mean, think about all the other things that Jesus could have used that miracle on, right? Think about all the broken people. Think about all the blind and hurting and sick and people who are demon-possessed and all these different things that Jesus didn't use as his first miracle. That's the other thing that's always confused me. right? If I was going to do my first miracle, I think I'd do that one where we raise some guy from the dead. Like, let's go, all right? This is how it's going to be. But Jesus' first miracle, it isn't opening the blind eyes. It isn't unstopping deaf ears. It isn't taking a young man's daughter and raising her back to life. It's basically keeping the party going. And when I was in college, I really liked that miracle. But now that I'm a little more mature, it confuses me. I mean, think about it. Like, Jesus had not done any other miracles. He'd done very little public teaching. He'd only had, at that point, only had a couple of disciples, Peter and Andrew and Nathaniel and Philip, probably maybe John, right? There's like, at that moment, like, it's very, very early on. He started extending invitations to a few disciples to come and follow him. Some said yes. John the Baptist had already said, that's the guy, right? But Jesus had not really taught publicly. He had not done any other miracles. Basically, Jesus was still really obscure. And yet he chooses this miracle. So we're in week 6 of our Encounters with Jesus series. We've been doing that throughout the whole summer. And up until this point, we've been studying individuals, not situations, right? We talked about Nathaniel and Nicodemus and the woman at the well. And we've been talking, last week we talked about the royal official. Like we had a focus on a person. Today I want to pause that and focus on a situation. Because the one really important kind of narrative that's going on in the Gospel of John, Encounters with Jesus we've been doing is all kind of a study of the Gospel of John and these encounters that people had with Jesus and what brought them to Jesus, right? And interestingly enough, in this encounter, the thing that brought to Jesus the attention, the fact that the wine had run out at a wedding. On first glance, it's just like, okay, well, go buy more, right? Or just say you're sorry. But what we don't understand, because we don't have this in our culture, Jesus' culture, the early Christian, the Judaic culture of that time was built on what they called an honor and shame system. Honor and shame. And all of life was based on whether or not you did the honoring thing or whether you did a shameful thing. And if you did a shameful thing, it wasn't just shame on you, it was shame on your whole family or your whole community, right? And if you did an honorable thing, it wasn't just an honor on you, it was an honor on your parents, and it was an honor on your community and your whole family. And so, like, basically the economy of Jesus' day, now not financially, but the cultural, the social economy, right, between men and women of Jesus' day was about honor and shame. And so what really brought this whole miracle to light was a man who was about to face a whole bunch of shame. And here's the question, right? Here's the question that I'm wrestling with, and I'm going to invite you to wrestle with as we read through John chapter 2. I'm going to be in the New International Version, but then I'm going to quote something out of the New Living because I like it better and it fits the Greek better, I believe. But most of this is from the NIV. And as we read, I'm going to invite you to wrestle with the question, why this miracle first? Why would Jesus turn water into wine at a wedding as his premier miracle? I'm going to invite you to wrestle through that. I'm going to read it and then I want to unpack it, okay? John chapter 2, starting at verse 1. On the third day, A wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. All right, so days 1 and 2, just so you understand, were literally like the first couple days of Jesus even doing ministry. He had just called a few people to follow him. Likely he had also gotten baptized by John the Baptist, right? But this is very, very early. This was within the first week of Jesus' ministry. So on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. So pay attention to who's here, okay? Because this will give you some clues as to why water into wine was the first miracle. So Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. So not just Jesus, but his closest friends. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Boo-hoo, right? So for us in our culture, it's like, okay, they got any beer? Right? Like, our culture is like, isn't there something else? Or can we get them some Kool-Aid, right? But wine represented honor in that culture. And so Jesus' mother comes to him and says, "They have no more wine." Verse 4, "Woman, why do you involve me?" Ooh, man, I wouldn't do that with my mama. I'll explain more in a little bit. Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." That's an interesting phrase. Hold on to that because it's a big part. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever Jesus tells you." You ever had a moment like that with your own parents where they tell you to do something, you argue back, and then they're like, "Go do it," right? Like, that's what it feels like. It's like there seems to be no gap in between Jesus going, "Why is that my problem?" and she's going, "Do whatever he tells you to," right? Like, I imagine this Italian grandma just walking over and be like, "Look, this is how this is going to go." All right, verse 6, nearby, okay, just so you know, that's not in there. I don't think Jesus' mother was Italian. And, okay. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing. Ding, ding, ding. Another hint as to why. So here's 6 stone water jars used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. So these are these massive containers that were used for washing of hands. Verse 7, Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and so they filled them to the brim. I like that, very specific, all the way to the top. And then he, that being Jesus, told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." Wait, you want me to put water in this thing that they wash hands for, and then you want me to give it to the master of ceremonies to try it out? Okay, this is what's happening. Verse 9, they did it. This is the servants. They did what Jesus said, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine, and he didn't realize where it had come from, and he probably wouldn't have drank it if he did, though the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. And then verse 10. Then he called the bridegroom aside. This is the master of ceremonies. He calls the groom over, and he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." Ding, 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 ding. That might be another hint, just so you know. In verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and who else is there? Brothers. That's important too. And his disciples, and there they stayed for a few days. That's, for me, the most fascinating of miracles that Jesus did. I mean, it's amazing that he raised somebody from the dead, but if he's going to raise himself from the dead, come on, yeah. Let's do a little pre-miracle in, right? Somebody said last week how cool it was that Jesus just speaks from afar, and the royal official's son is healed, right? 20 miles away, like long distance healing. That's so cool. There are some powerful miracles in Scripture, but this one is the most fascinating for me. It's the most interesting. I mean, why? Why would Jesus care this much just to really keep the wedding party going? Why does it matter? All right, let me give you some context. You need to understand a little bit more about Jesus' day and the culture and the people. So a wedding ceremony in Jesus' day lasted, anybody know? 7 days. That is one heck of a wedding, right? 7 days of celebration for a wedding. And it was really, back then, how the wedding went was this massive determiner, not just how the marriage was going to go, but how their influence in the community was going to go. So there's all this cultural influence about who got invited and where they sit and who got served first and what they got served, right? You're seeing there's all these details that had to do with honor and with shame. And so the groom would pay for and organize the wedding back then and be responsible to make sure that there was enough of everything. And then there would be a master of ceremonies. We read about that. I think it was in verse 7 or 8. This master of ceremonies isn't the person who was actually providing the wine or providing the food. It was the most respected individual that the groom had in their life who was supposed to put their seal of approval over the wedding. This is a highly respected family member or friend that would watch and make sure that people were properly honored, that no shame was brought upon the family. Everything from food to drink to seating. So this master of ceremonies was basically the one who was judging and approving the wedding. And all weddings in Jesus' day culturally had them. And again, I'll mention that honor and shame was what the entire community lived on. And when someone was honored, the whole family was honored. And when someone was shamed, their whole family was shamed. And so it mattered. Every detail of the wedding mattered in the 7-day feast. And I did some research and realized that if the groom messed it up, if the groom brought dishonor in the way that he planned the wedding and the way that the wedding came off, if it was discovered that the groom had not done his proper part to prepare for the wedding and to bring honor to the family, the bride's family could legally sue the groom's family for taking away their honor. They could literally take them to court and get money back from the groom that he paid for that wedding, but he didn't do a good enough job because it brought dishonor on the bride's family. So there's a lot at stake in this moment. So running out of wine was an extremely dishonoring moment. An extremely dishonoring moment. And I wish I could come up with something that was even close in our culture. I wrote down running out of birthday cake at a birthday party. Oh, sorry. I mean, that's bad, but it's not like I'm going to sue you because I didn't get cake. Unless you really like cake. Or maybe running out of food at a family reunion, right? Our culture, we don't live in this honor and shame kind of context the way that Jesus did. It's hard to put into words how significant of a mistake this was on the part of the groom. Because it was going to bring shame on him and shame on his family and shame on his marriage and shame on his community. So let's go back, okay? Because there are some really, really important parts of this story that we're going to have to pull out if we're going to understand why this miracle, why first? Why was this what Jesus chose to spend his energy on? There's a verse 11. I don't have it on the screen, but in verse 11, John says this was the first of the, what's it say? Signs. So that's a big clue, right? This was the first of the signs of Jesus, right? Not the first of the miracles. They're two different words in Greek. Miracles is dunamis. That's the Greek, and that's where we get dynamite, right? Cool, powerful, right? Dunamis is miracles. But signs is semeion. Completely different word. And basically it means a miracle with a deeper meaning. A miracle with a deeper meaning. A sign, a symbol, a representation of the kingdom of God come to earth. So let's unpack that together, okay? Because John said it's really important. This is the first of the signs. Going back to John chapter 2, verse 1, I want to unpack as we go. So Jesus is invited to the wedding. His mother was there. Most theologians would argue that they were probably some way pretty strongly connected to this individual. They might have even been a family member or a very close friend. Especially since Jesus' mother kind of took charge for a little while. Did you notice that? She had some level of influence in the context. So this is a really meaningful, important wedding in the life of Jesus' family. Likely his brothers are there. We read that in verse 12, right? So Jesus is there, his brothers are there, Jesus' closest friends are there, right? This is a really, really important wedding in this moment. In verse 2, it says, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding, and when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. Okay, we understand that this was a hugely shameful moment for the groom, but why would it matter? Why would Mary go to Jesus with this problem? And in fact, you look at verse 4, Jesus asked the exact same question. Woman, why do you involve me? That seems really harsh, okay? That seems like a really kind of almost disrespectful response to his own mother, okay? Because in English, the translation isn't great. I want to give you a different translation, exact same verse and the New Living, because it's so much closer. New Living Translation says it this way, dear woman, okay? That's important to know. In fact, that word that he uses right there when he speaks to her in verse 4 is the same word that he uses when he's hanging on the cross, and he says to his own mother and to John, he said, woman, here is your son, here is your mother, right? So what he's really saying is, dear, it doesn't translate well into most English, but it's like, dear woman, my beloved woman, not like someone I deeply respect, not just, woman, what are you bugging me for, right? Like, this was not what Jesus was saying. He is saying, dear woman, and then notice in the Greek says, what is that to you and me? That's what Jesus says. Why are you involving you and me? This, basically, you go back to the other one, verse in NIV, it says, why do you involve me? But in the Greek, it's actually, why are you involving us? Right? Dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus replied. You ever thought about how much of the sin we get ourselves into that isn't Jesus' problem? That he takes on himself. You ever thought about how much brokenness we get ourselves into that is not Jesus' problem? And yet, he takes it on himself. And then there's this phrase, really important phrase, okay? So, dear woman, that's not our problem. He's saying, Mama that I love so much, why are you dragging us into this, right? That's more like what he's saying. But then he says, why? In the New Living Translation, it says, my time has not yet come. But specifically, it's actually better in the NIV, my hour has not yet come. Did you know that in 12 different occasions in the Gospel of John, there's this reference to the hour of God, or Jesus' hour. And in all 12 of those references, what is being talked about is his crucifixion. So what Jesus is having in this moment, we need to understand something. When he says, dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. He's not talking about my hour for the people to know who I am. He's saying my hour, my death, my sacrificial death. It's not here yet. Because what I believe Jesus is actually saying, it's this interesting phrase, but what Jesus is actually saying is that this will be the beginning of the end for me. This isn't just his first miracle. It's the first of many miracles that will lead to the last miracle in his resurrection. And so Jesus doesn't just have shame and honor about this wedding in mind. He's got his own impending death in mind. To do this miracle would likely bring so much attention on Jesus. To do this miracle would likely bring so much awareness. I mean, this is probably a really big wedding. If you notice like 150 gallons of wine, I hope there's a lot of people there, okay? I mean, this is a massive wedding in a town very close to where he grew up, where lots of people would know and be known. This one miracle would bring so much attention on him that Jesus knew it would be the beginning of the end, that his hour was drawing near. And so Jesus' mom, I love what she does. Clearly she's got some influence in this wedding. She directs the servants to do what Jesus says and kind of leverages her authority in this moment. And I love the fact of what Jesus uses, okay? We need to stop here for a moment because this has a ton of symbolism. Jesus has this interaction with his mother. He says, "Dear woman, why are you bringing us into this?" The Joshua-inspired version, not the nearly inspired. Okay. Having this conversation with his mother, he says, "My time has not yet come." She instructs the servants to go get and to do whatever Jesus says, right? She didn't bring up these water jars. Jesus does. Jesus, in this moment, he says, nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Okay, I'm going to need like 2 volunteers, preferably young people who don't mind coming up front and give me a hand. I promise not to embarrass you. Come on up, Miss Gillespie. Come on up. Okay, let me get my microphone. I didn't tell you I was going to do this. I'm using this one. Okay. Have you guys noticed this up here yet? Come on over this way. All right. Without touching it and without looking underneath it, what do you think? I want to take a guess and tell me what you think underneath, and then we're going to look, okay? What do you think it is?
Jars.
Oh, okay. How about you? What do you think?
Jars.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, that just ruined all the fun. Nice job. I'm really proud of you. Go ahead, pull it off. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you very much. Now, how many do you count here?
3.
And how many gallons are in each one? Do you know? Want to take a guess?
20. 30.
There are 5 gallons in each one of these. So that means there's 15 gallons here. And at the wedding, they said that Jesus brought 6 water jars, each 20 to 30 gallons each. So that's about 150 gallons. So how many? I know I'm going to make you do math, and I promised I wouldn't embarrass you. But if we have 15 gallons here, how many more of these do we need to get to 150 gallons? So we need 10 times more than what's here. What's 10 times 3? Do you know that one? 30. So can you imagine 30 more of these on the stage? 30 more to get to 150 gallons. Show me how big you think that might be if we had 30 more of those just piled up everywhere. How big would it get? Right to the edge, yeah, and all the way out, I would think. Yeah, way out there. So we are talking about a massive amount of water that is being turned into wine. Thank you so much for coming. Can we put our hands together for these beautiful young ladies? $150 gallons of water turned into wine. But what's even more significant is not the amount of wine, but what they were in. It says very clearly, 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing. Here's what happens, right? You go all the way back to Exodus, where Moses is on the mountain, and he gives the people of Israel from God the 10 commandments, right? And then from those 10 commandments, we get a whole bunch of more rules that if you haven't read any of like Deuteronomy, challenge on, right? There's all these kind of rules about blessings and curses and what it means to follow God. But then what happened, by the time Jesus' day comes along, they took those original 10 commandments and those extra blessings and curses and all those kinds of things from God, and they had added a whole bunch of stuff on top, specifically ceremonial washing. And so the Jewish culture in that day basically took something out of context that God never said in Scripture and required very specific types of washing if you were going to be considered clean, right? Clean before God. And so there's these 6 different water jars that were used basically to wash people's hands. And this is what Jesus chooses to use. We don't know if they got scoured out before, right? Likely is they were probably still dirty from the hundreds of guests that had already washed their hands. Fresh water, but they didn't have bleach back then. And here Jesus, he takes the symbol of religious oppression and turns it into the symbol of relational freedom. Jesus takes this symbol of religious oppression and turns it into a symbol of relational freedom. Jesus takes something that's designed to control and oppress the people and turns it into something that's designed to set people free. Friends, do you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds an awful lot like the cross. That sounds an awful lot like what Jesus did on the cross, where he bore the shame of all of mankind and the sins of the world on his body. The thing that was designed to kill and oppress mankind becomes the symbol of freedom. And it's not just the jars, but what he turns the water inside of the jars, he turns it into wine, right? There's a prophecy in Isaiah that talks about when Messiah comes, the wine will flow from heaven, right? And then all the way back in Genesis 35, there's this thing called a drink offering. You ever heard of that? So we're used to in the Old Testament having like a lamb or some sort of like a grain offering, an animal offering, but there was also a drink offering all the way back in Genesis. And the drink offering would be poured out as a way to honor God. So there's all this symbolism behind this one moment, right? What Jesus is trying to demonstrate, why I believe Jesus chose this moment and this miracle as the entering miracle into the world, was because he was taking the thing that religion had turned into slavery, that only he could turn into freedom. And it was a sign, a foreshadowing of the things that were to come. To fill them full of water. And notice, the only people that knew, did you pick up on that? If you go to verse 7, right, the only people that knew, it's the servants, right? The only people that knew where that water really came from, right? So they did what Jesus said. They fill them with water, draw some out, take it to the master of the banquet. They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water and had been turned into wine. He didn't even realize it where it had come from, although the servants knew. They're the lowest of the low, the only ones that knew that Jesus took the thing that was religious oppression and turned it into religious freedom, right? Indeed. And here's the reality, right? There's even some more like beautiful symbolism behind it. By doing this, what Jesus is saying, He's saying he's the real master of ceremonies. The master of ceremonies. Why did John say that he wrote the gospel? So that you might believe in Jesus, and that by believing him you might have life. That you might have, that's John 20, verse 31, that you might have life. That when we believe in him, we finally get this whole new way of living, this whole new way of understanding life. And so Jesus is saying, look, I'm the master of ceremonies. I can take religious oppression and turn it into relational freedom. I can take shame and turn it into glory and beauty. And isn't that what the cross is for? And isn't that what brought Jesus here in the first place? And then there's one more piece. It's really beautiful. So then he calls the bridegroom aside, right? And can you imagine? The groom doesn't even know about what's going on, right? Remember, you go back one verse, it says that only the servants knew what's going on. All he knew, last he knew, the wine had run out. And so the master of ceremonies is calling him over. It's like, oh, I'm busted, right? Like, I'm in trouble. But no. What does the master of ceremonies say? Verse 10, he called the bridegroom aside and he said, everybody brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after. The guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best until now. What's Jesus saying? You've had prophets, you've had judges, you've had kings, you've had people from all of Old Testament trying to point you to God, and now here's the real thing. Here's the best of the best. Here's the Son of God incarnate, the kingdom of heaven breaking through into earth. You've saved the best for last. And that's why John said in verse 11, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee. What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee is the first of many signs. Not just a miracle, but a miracle with a deeper meaning, one that takes religious oppression and turns into relational freedom through the power of Christ himself. Do you know what symbol later on in the Gospel of John, what symbol does John use to represent Christ in the church? Do you know? He represents the relationship that Jesus has with the Christian church as a marriage. Jesus is called the great bridegroom, and the church is called his bride. The symbolism in this story is so rich and it is so deep. But Jesus is saying that this old system of hand washing and religious oppression will never be enough. And he's not just offering us a future joy, a life after death. He's offering us joy now, in this moment, something to do with our shame now, with our brokenness now. You see, we all feel like we're struggling, that we're not enough. Friends, if you don't believe that the human condition, one of the greatest and deepest problems that we as humans all have is that we just feel like we're not enough, take a look and ask yourself the question, why do you drive the car that you drive? Why do you wear the clothes that you wear? Why do you put the makeup on your face? Why do you try so hard in so many different situations? If not deep down inside of you, you know that something's wrong. And all of us in some way, shape, or form, we're struggling with not being enough, not feeling enough, having this shame and this brokenness that is just laying heavy upon us day after day. And what Jesus does in this moment, he invites us to bring all of that to him. To bring all of our insufficiencies, our not enoughness to him. Whether it's not enough wine, or not enough hand washing, or not enough honor to be earned in the world. Whatever the not enough is, Jesus is inviting us to bring to him. Because a genuine encounter with Jesus will confront our self-sufficiency. When we have a genuine encounter with Jesus, it will radically confront our desires to do life on our own, to earn enough honor, to be good enough, to be smart enough, to be fast enough, to be skinny enough, to be rich enough, to be influential enough, to be followed enough, right? You pick your enough. Genuine encounters with Jesus will confront our very human self-sufficiency. Dallas Willard has this quote, and I love it. Because what Jesus is challenging us to do in this moment, this first miracle, he's challenging us to bring all of our not enoughness to him and see what he'll transform it into. Dallas says it this way: it is unexplainable how a person can rely on Christ for the next life without doing so for this one. Trusting Jesus for our eternal destiny without trusting him for our daily lives. Is this really possible? Nope. I deeply respect Dallas. He was a teacher and pastor. And he asked the really hard question. If we're going to trust Jesus for the life after death, why don't we trust Jesus for the life before death? If we're going to trust Jesus for our eternal security, why don't we trust Jesus for our temporary security? If we're going to trust Jesus to take away our eternal shame, why can't we trust Jesus to take away our earthly shame and brokenness? And so you ask me why Jesus would turn water into wine as his first miracle. Because he's challenging us to bring all of our not enoughness to him and see what he would do. So the question I have to ask, will you choose to trust that Jesus is always enough? Will you choose to trust that his grace is always sufficient? Will you choose to bring your shame and your not enoughness and your brokenness and want to be thisness of yourself and lay it at the feet of Jesus and see what the real master of ceremonies will do? Whether it's a religious system or shame from your past or brokenness in your present, whatever it is, will you trust? Will you choose to trust that Jesus is always enough? Second Corinthians 12:9, Paul puts it this way. He had begged God to take away this brokenness in his life. And then God says to him, this is Paul's words, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Imagine if that wedding hadn't run out of wine. Imagine if Jesus' mother hadn't brought the news to him. Imagine if they hadn't sought Jesus in their shame. What Paul has showed us, what Peter has showed us, what John's trying to tell us, that the grace of Jesus is always sufficient. And that his power is made perfect in our weakness, not our strength. In our emptiness, not our fullness. In our poorness, not our richness. That his grace is sufficient. Because a genuine encounter with Jesus will confront our self-sufficiency, our desire to face life on our own, and what Jesus was trying to help us see is that there is relational freedom beyond religious oppression. That we can bring our deepest shame and brokenness and hopelessness to him so that he might transform it for his glory and for our good. Would you pray with me? Jesus, you know You know so much better than I ever could. Each of the stories in this room today. You know people who've been caught in religious oppression and thinking that somehow religion could save them. You know that people who've been caught in shame, in this past, in this brokenness, in this chasing after something to try and fill the emptiness inside of them. You know the Nathaniels in this room, those skeptical students who can't even imagine trying to trust the church again. You know the Nicodemuses in this room who've spent their whole lives studying the Bible but still have this shame that they have not turned over to you. You know the royal officials in this room who have all this influence and all this power, but there's this brokenness in their lives they can do nothing about. And Jesus, you know our stories. From Nathaniel to Nicodemus, from the woman at the well to the royal official, all the way up to this groom in this moment facing so much shame. You know us and you love us. And you offer a whole new way of life that can transform our shame. Because your grace is always sufficient. Jesus, teach us to trust in you that way, I pray, in your name. Amen.